Please welcome Chair of the Real Property Valuation Forum, Peter Gallo.
Hello, my name is Peter Gallo, and I'm your 2021 Real Property Valuation Forum Chair. And we're trying a little something different today outside of our normal mid-year and end-of-year forums. I'd like to welcome you to our Ask an Appraiser live forum. As appraisers who are also Realtor members, we are a resource for all NAR membership, and we are here today to provide you with access to our expertise as valuation professionals. We have put together a panel of accomplished residential, commercial, and review appraisers. Some of these folks also find time to be instructors, supervisors, and many sit or have sat on state regulatory boards and national committees. A few of us are also even licensed brokers and agents. It's not unusual for appraisers to also be active brokers. That being said, we are all here representing ourselves as members of NAR, and any comments or opinions are our own. Here at the National Association of Realtors, we're all a big family, and the knowledge base that makes up our membership is what makes our organization so strong. We are here for each other, and if one idea can come out of this event, let it be that we are all in this together. Last year, our NAR Real Property Valuation Committee formed a work group and developed two documents that many of our members will find helpful when it comes to appraisals. Both a flyer on appraisals for home buyers and a Q&A about appraisals for agents. We will post the links to these for you in the chat box. Many of you submitted questions for the panel when you registered, and we're going to begin with those. While we are answering them, please put any additional questions in the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many of them as we can in the second half of today's program. Also, today's session will be recorded and shared with all registrants, as well as posted on nar.realtor. So let's meet some of our great Realtor appraiser members. Let's start with an appraiser who is currently the 2021 Vice Chair of our NAR Real Property Valuation Committee, Frank Gregoire. Next, my good friend, Dr. Samuel Henderson. Dr. Sam is a commercial real estate appraiser and instructor. Next, my fellow North Carolinian, Clara France. Claire also concentrates in commercial real estate appraisal. My friend Maureen Sweeney. Maureen is an appraiser in Chicago and the author of The Valuation of Condominiums, Cooperatives, and PUDs. And last but not least, my good friend Michelle Bradley. Michelle is a certified general appraiser and instructor. So hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Pete.
So we got through that introduction, and we have a lot of questions that were submitted when folks registered for the event, and we've tried to group them together into segments so we'd be able to answer them a little more efficiently. So let's start with some questions. First on current events. So how are appraisers adjusting to the rapid rise in home prices? Everybody's trying to outbid each other. Some are bidding $200,000 or $300,000 over asking. Our audience wants to know, how does the appraiser account, does the appraiser account for the demand of the property, and how do they do it?
I'll jump right into this pool.
Maureen?
So as appraisers, we have to analyze the market. And so in part of the analysis of the market, we have to figure out what are inventory levels, what are absorption rates, how is the market increasing or decreasing in value. And this is very early on in the valuation process and helps us determine what our where to go for our comparable sales, as well as what are the various different markets that may be within a neighborhood, and then that helps us determine what is our market segment. But then I have a question for the realtors, for the listing agents, as well as the representative of the buyer. You have the listing agent who is in love with a bidding war, but what about the obligation of the buyer's agent And when they see that their client is exceeding what the market will accept, and they are buying a property that may be higher than market value, because we have to actually look at what is the market value. And so when you get into bidding wars, who's advocating for whom? You have got the listing agent and the selling agent, but the question is, as the appraiser, we are, we may not advocate for either side by law. By law, as agents, you must. As listing agents, you must advocate for your clients if you're the selling agent or the buyer's agent. As appraisers, it is illegal for us to advocate for anything except the true value of the property. So to answer your question, when we see these bidding wars, what is the motivation and is it market acceptable? Because we have to look at the market value.
I'd like to tag on to what Maureen said. She did that so eloquently. You're so good. The question is, how are appraisers adjusting to the rapid rise in prices? We're doing the same thing we're doing when we're in a stable market and when we're in a declining market. It's the research, the research, the research.
So you're looking at active listings, pendings, you're knowing your markets, you're looking at trends. Dr. Sam, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just because there's a bidding war going on and there's a bidder who wins doesn't mean that the market value is going to be the same as that contract price that the bidder has. We go by something called the definition of market value put out by Fannie Mae. And that market value defines itself as the most probable price. It's not going to be the bidding price. It's not going to be the seller's price or the buyer's price, but it's going to be the most probable price. And that's what we make reference to when we get our value.
And we're gonna get to that too, because we have questions on contract versus appraised value. But sticking to current events, just in your practice, what have you all have found to be the most difficult dealing with the pandemic? Anything stand out? I know for us, it was just having enough protective gear right when it all started for the office and making appointments and that type of thing. But it's really been kind of smooth, other than maybe the GSEs, what they're doing with waivers and some of the other exceptions that are going on. Any comments on that? Michelle?
I'll jump in and say the most difficult thing for me has been the amount of time necessary to wrap my head around the bidding wars. Everything in my market selling over list price as well. Although I love the question was, the bidding wars are 200,000 and 300,000 over the list price. In my Western Pennsylvania market, it's 10 and 20,000 over the same price. But it's the amount of time in the research contrasted with the real estate agents having the very tight deadlines in there for mortgage commitment and time to close. So there's a lot of extra research and very short time period to do it in.
And Claire, commercially, what have you been dealing with your market, the commercial markets with the pandemic? Anything stand out?
Well, so commercial is challenging because, there are so many different submarkets and some are doing better than others. Like industrial in our area has been doing great, especially, storage and distribution. Whereas, there are other sections where like retail or office where the future is a little bit uncertain. And so, when we're doing things like projecting out, what's going to happen in the next few years, that is pretty challenging right now. And so, like Maureen said, we can look at, we can do that. We always have to do that. And it's always, challenging for different reasons. But we just have to be thinking a little bit differently right now, given the unprecedented times. And I think it does take more analysis and more research to really get a good handle on things.
Right. And Frank does a lot of review work, and he's seen a lot of appraisals from the last go around with the crisis, the mortgage crisis. What would you want to tell the membership to, just understand what the appraisers are going through and what they need to do in the appraisals, really, because the appraisals are for down the road when, if anything were to happen. It's more about confidence in the market.
I'd say a significant difference between An appraiser's work and an agent's work is that an appraiser's work stays around for a long time. You know, at one time, 30-year mortgages were the norm. And there's still folks that have 30-year mortgages. There's an appraisal that is attached to that loan. I spend all my time reviewing appraisal reports completed from 2004 through 2007. You know, the nice thing for appraisers about my review work is no appraisers are harmed by my work because the defendants are not appraisers. But people are harmed. And in some cases it is borrowers that are harmed. In some cases it is investors that are harmed. So the thing to realize is the appraisal stays around for a very long time, as long as that loan is outstanding. And sometimes when the loan is not outstanding, even when it's been paid off, there are consequences that can be assessed against someone, an appraiser, a lender, an investor, because of a faulty appraisal, not credible appraisal.
Okay. Right.
Peter, may I add to what everyone else has said? One of the challenges that appraisers have is that in many instances, the lender or the client will order an appraisal that they don't want us to do an inspection of the interior of the property. So therefore, we are dependent upon a listing sheet that has been generated by the listing agent. And if the listing agent is not putting in to their listing sheet credible data, and they are depending upon that small little thing at the bottom of the listing sheet that says, we're not responsible for anything. Well, then that gives the appraiser a very difficult time to figure out what really is going on with the property. I do a lot of condominium work. And so what is the owner occupancy for the association? What is the, owner occupancy? Are there any lawsuits? Is anyone greater than 60 days late? All of this is information that the lender needs to know in order for them to make a decision if they wish to invest in this property or not. And if the listing agent is not aware of these things, they really should be, because we're looking for that information, the lender's looking for the information, and if the listing agent is not providing that information, why aren't they? Because they're supposed to be representing the property as best that they know how. So truly, one of the biggest challenges that we have is encountering listing sheets that are not accurate.
One thing that I find is helpful is that when I contact the agent, I have a verification form and I ask for certain information. The challenge to me is getting the call back from the agents regarding what's on the listing form versus what's in the property. And another big challenge to me is the condo docs or the HOA docs. I need a current copy of those. I need the operating statement, which shows what the budget is for the condominium so I can analyze it. So it helps me when agents do have the current condo documents and call me back and fill out those verification forms so that I can have accurate information for the appraisal.
Yeah, I'll add.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add that it's super crucial for appraisers to be able to talk to the listing agent and the buyer's agent and really understand what really happened with the sale. And I think fortunately in my market, the brokers tend to be very friendly and very helpful. Sometimes people think they're in trouble when an appraiser's calling asking about a property you sold. You're not in trouble. We're just trying to do our job. Yeah, that's a big part of our job because it can't all be on the sheet, especially, what were the specifics of the transaction, that doesn't end up in the MLS.
Right.
But that's really important for us to be able to understand the transaction.
Well, and I think during this time where everybody's trying to move to technology and less human interaction and get things done, we really need, appraisers are really suffering because we really need to communicate with everybody. And so we need people to answer the phone and return our calls and that sort of thing. Maureen, one last thing and then we'll move on.
Absolutely. To add on to what Dr. Sam was just saying, a lot of the condominium condo decks, CC&Rs, which are your conditions, covenants, and restrictions for, properties that are in PUDs, they are in a PDF form. The lender needs them. The listing agent should request them if they are doing an appraisal in a condo or in a PUD. So, and a lot of these are in PDF form. So it's very easy for the listing agent to obtain these, you know, hopefully they are, because they're talking to their own, the owner of the property. They should have that information. And then they can just easily click, forward that information to us. We have the documents and we have the legal description, and this will help us identify the property.
Okay.
Peter,
Yes.
let me add one more thing. And Claire touched on this. You touched on this as well, about one of the difficulties. Real estate, selling real estate, whether it's residential or commercial real estate, it's a people business.
Yes.
It depends on personal relationships. I was licensed as a real estate broker way back when. I got out of brokerage because I didn't like people. However, I learned that the appraisal business is a people business as well.
Mhm.
We depend on personal relationships. We depend on relationships with people in the brokerage business. I cherish my friendships and professional relationships with people in the brokerage business here in Florida and across the country and across the state. Because when I've got a question, when I need information, I can pick up the phone, I can email someone that I've got a relationship with, and they will respond to me. And on the same, at the same end, when someone has an appraisal question, they don't hesitate to shoot me a text, send me an email, pick up the phone, ask me whether, you know, this is, you know, right or wrong, or there's something, or they need some assistance. So it is a people business, and I've just encouraged the audience there to you know, hug an appraiser. I mean, just you know, we're human beings, and we really don't bite, and we do really value our relationship and the information that we get from people in the brokerage business.
And to piggyback on what Frank just said, meet the appraiser when you are, you know, when we have to do our inspection, the person who actually knows a lot about the property more than we do is the listing agent. So it's really important if you meet us, please meet us, because this way, if you want to have a discussion with us prior to the point where we press send to our client and transmit our appraisal report, if there's anything that you want to say about the property, say it to us during our inspection. If we have questions, it's a great time to say, hey, what's going on with the parking? What's going on with, you know, hey, when they did all these renovations, were permits pulled? Help us understand, meet us. Lockbox is a great tool for using with other agents, but do your job, listing agent. Seriously, meet the appraiser.
You are covering a lot of some of the material that are in some of these other questions, and that a lot of the agents wanted to know, a lot of the membership wanted to know, you know, what can you give an appraiser? What can you, and that's a great, we want to meet you. We want the appraiser. Michelle, what did you want?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that. Can you see I'm chomping at the bit? Pardon me for not answering a little earlier. I'm trying to answer the hundreds of questions we have in the chat box. So if you see me typing, that's why I'm trying to get to as many of you as I can. And it's 2021, people. It's our professional responsibility to share the information and have communication between the real estate agent to the appraiser. Remember that appraisers and real estate agents are regulated differently. We cannot tell you everything due to our confidentiality requirements within the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. We can't have that back and forth flow of all information. However, when you are meeting the appraiser, bring with you as much information as you can. Folks, the appraisers have or should have the multi-list information. But here's what's key for you, and I teach this in my classes. Don't just give them the multi-list data sheets. Write down on the multi-list data sheet why this is a comparable for the subject property. And here's another really good key tip for you. Bring into that packet of information the sales that you are afraid the appraiser is going to use. People always question me about this. if you're thinking, boy, I hope the appraiser misses that sale across the street because it sold really low. It was a divorce. It had purple shag carpet and 87 iguanas in the house. And it really sold below what it should have because of that. Don't assume that the appraiser is going to automatically just know that. The appraiser has to do the research to find that out. Bring that right into the appraiser packet and write down house across the street had purple shag carpet and 87 iguanas in the house, and provide that information. Really helpful.
And don't be afraid to give any information to the appraiser. The appraiser is the one that will make the decision on what to listen to or not, or disregard. So don't be afraid. The more information, the better. Appraisals aren't magic. We're all dealing with the same data, and they shouldn't be magic. They should be a local appraiser who knows the market and has access to the MLS and has the access to the same data that all the market participants in that area have access to. So I want to move on to something that we didn't have too many questions on this, but I think it's important for us to bring it up. We've had some stories in the national news reporting claims of racial bias in appraisals. And as Frank was saying before, this is a people business and it's hard to hear that. So we've had some members raise concerns over this issue. So what can we tell our audience about this subject?
I'd be happy to answer that. First off, the allegations of bias are disturbing. They're upsetting. And I don't know of anyone that is in the organized profession, whether you belong to an appraisal organization, the National Association of Realtors, other professional groups that slough off these accusations. I think everyone sees them as being extremely serious. And they're extremely serious because it goes completely against not only state and federal law, but it goes against everything that an appraiser is supposed to be. An appraiser is defined, and Michelle mentioned the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. One of the things about that is it has a list of definitions, a list of definitions that are important to appraisers and important to appraisal standards. And it defines an appraiser. And an appraiser is someone who's independent, impartial, and objective. Also, an appraiser is required to complete an assignment. And that's what we call an appraisal. An assignment is required to complete. See, I'm screwing up already. The appraiser is required to complete the assignment with no bias. And that means, when I say bias, I'm referring to any type of bias, whether it is bias in favor or against, whether it is bias towards the client, bias towards the property, bias towards the borrower, favorable or unfavorable. So first off, appraisal organizations take it extremely seriously. The other thing is that the appraisal organizations, including the Appraisal Foundation, have been stepping up to attack this problem. First off, we don't know exactly how widespread it is. We know that there's accusations. But the Appraisal Foundation, for one thing, over a year ago, actually it was in 2019, created a subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. In 2020, that committee became the Special Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and it's focused on increasing the diversity of the profession. The fact of the matter is most appraisers look like me, and they look like Peter. In fact, most of us have beards too. And it would be nicer if the appraisal profession was more diverse, was younger, and more reflective of what the population looks like. The National Association of Realtors Real Property Valuation Committee last year had a special work group that brought in a number of folks to talk about the impact of race on valuations, whether or not there is in fact racial disparity in valuations, and it's going to be working in 2021 on that. The Appraisal Standards Board has tackled the question by issuing an exposure draft for what is called an advisory opinion. An advisory opinion is advice to market participants, advice to appraisers. And that advisory opinion is titled
AO16.
AO16 is, I got it up here on the screen, Fair Housing Laws, Avoiding Bias in Real Property Appraisal and Appraisal Review, Development, and Reporting. In addition to that, the Appraisal Institute, along with the Appraisal Foundation, then sponsored by the National Association of Realtors, had a symposium, I guess that was early this year, that went over, what, 4 sessions, where we had academics talk about, the roots of racial disparity in mainly assessment, and how that may reflect on valuations. So first off, appraisers are taking the issue very seriously. Oh, the Appraiser Qualifications Board as well. They are including a fair housing component in qualifying education. They're also going to be including a fair housing component that will serve for continuing education, and the 7-hour National USPAP update course that appraisers are required to take every 2 years is being rewritten to include a significant section on fair housing and anti-bias. So everyone's taking it seriously. The most important thing is all we have to sell is our competency and our objectivity and our impartiality. And whatever we can do as appraisers to ensure that all practitioners are adhering to that is what we aim to do. The other thing is that we'd like to see that anyone with a legitimate complaint about discrimination in the provision of our services, file the complaint with the appropriate agency so that it can be acted upon. That's one thing that we haven't heard about in all the news stories, with the exception of one, that the affected, the wronged party, the aggrieved party, has filed a complaint either with HUD or their state regulatory agency. So we'd like to see the wrong parties go ahead and file a complaint.
So hopefully, I mean, for the thousands and thousands of appraisals that are out there, we're seeing it in a handful. We've seen a handful of news stories, and hopefully, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on. It's certainly raised our eyebrows, those of us in the profession, and we're not going to stand for it. And we're going to make sure we know what's going on and take care of it. So,
Peter,
yes.
I'd like to just add a couple of supplemental comments to what Frank has already addressed. When I served on our state board from the Illinois Appraisal Licensing Board from 2005 till 2017, and during the 2004 through 2008 time period, there was a lot of appraisal issues and with valuation. And one of the comments that we heard from well-intended appraisers was, I just wanted to help. I just wanted to help the buyer. I just wanted to help the owner so that way they could get their loan. And as appraisers, we have to just look at the data. Again, I've said it before, we cannot advocate. And so some of these appraisers actually their license were disciplined, or they were actually asked, they were actually removed from the industry because they became advocates. The other thing that Frank brought up was the difference between a real property appraiser, who is the person who is doing appraisals for mortgage transactions, and who most of the people that licensed brokers will encounter, versus appraisers and assessors who do work for ad valorem tax. And so a lot of the research that was done on racial bias was done using data, not from real property appraisers doing individual appraisal reports. Rather, it was done using data through the assessor and ad valorem tax, and those are mass appraisals versus where you look at entire swaths of properties versus looking at individual properties.
Okay, so I know Dr. Sam wants to chime in, and then we have so many questions. I mean, there's 353 in the chat.
Oh,
I'm
Email.
typing as quickly as I can.
So, and we have a half hour left. Dr. Sam.
okay. I'm a part of the organization that's responsible for doing what Frank was talking about, so I can't comment, but it is something that we want to consider, and it is being taken under advisement.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I thought it was going to be more than that.
You
but-
sure, right?
Okay. So two of the big topics that we're seeing a lot are comparable selection and value for upgrades or condition, where you're seeing your most bang for your buck, that type of thing. So as far as you get you get a property, and in the markets now, the sales are all over the place. What are some things, and I'm going to start with Claire, especially commercially, you deal with so many different kinds of properties. Where do you start? How do you pick comps? I think we need to help the audience understand. You look at the high and you look at the low, and you kind of try and, when you have a complicated, or you have a lack of sales.
Yeah, it's a process, that is for sure. So, we start looking as wide as possible, and then narrow it down to the most similar properties. And I'm probably a little overkill. I tend to use a lot of comps. But once we pick 10 sales that we think are the most similar properties, start to make some adjustments. And there will be outliers for various reasons. There could be something distressed about a property that maybe we are not aware of why, but for whatever reason, it's selling 20% less than all of the others. I'll throw out an outlier, and same with, at the top of the range, there might be one that, maybe there was a bidding war, or it was a specific, property that, somebody was willing to pay some crazy premium for, that the rest, that the data really doesn't support. So there will be those, outliers there. And it really you have to look at a lot of data to sort of figure out what are the best comps for a certain property. So it is a process, and, there are typically, there's a lot of data to look at to select, the best comps, and that, interviewing the brokers and figuring out all of the specifics, what, if they released, how long was left on release, how did that affect the sale price, if at all? So there's a lot that goes into selecting the best comps, I'd say.
Well, and what, we always say one sale does not make a market. That's kind of an appraiser theme. So there was a question about what is an anomaly? How can you tell if it's not? Well, it's more of just a description when you see it. It's not something that you're out there looking for, but you're considering everything. And again, it comes down to people, professionals, local professionals that know their market. And there was a question about, I'm a new agent, what should I do? Or as a new appraiser, get in your car and drive neighborhoods and get familiar. Any tool you can find to learn your market, utilize it. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll find, if I call a broker and they'll say, are you calling because that one was low? Because here's why. And then, there are a lot of ways to kind of figure out, and certainly driving around, you might, drive by and notice that there's something in the neighborhood that is affecting the prices up, up or down. So certainly being aware of the surroundings is very important.
Frank, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, a comparable sale, an easy way to think of it, something if your buyer would consider buying instead of the property that's being appraised. Just last weekend, a real estate broker friend of mine sent me an appraisal that she couldn't believe. And it was a unicorn. It was a 5,000 square foot townhouse in an area where there's only 4 like it. None of them have sold for the past 2 years. And, but the appraiser used 2,600 square foot townhouses that happen to be close. But would the buyer of a 5,000 square foot townhouse be looking as an alternative a 2,600 square foot townhouse? Even if it's just down the street? No, they wouldn't. It's not a comparable sale. So a comparable would be something that the buyer would consider. And when you have a particularly unique property, I know that in situations where I've had difficulty because there's no inventory or no sales, I've actually interviewed the buyers or the buyer's agent and said, you know, they put in an offer on this. Where else were you showing them property? What were they considering as alternatives? And that gives me an idea of where I might find a comparable sale, or at least a comparable listing that gives me some kind of indication as to what the property is worth in today's market.
I mean, this is the bulk of the questions, is about how we pick comparables, and it would help us to dwell on this a little bit to help give our membership information on what to provide to the appraisers and what are really some things that we can consider and would help us. So Maureen,
it's not quite like a bingo ball machine. It's not quite like that.
It is not a bingo ball machine. It is not a dart board. So you have the neighborhood where the property is located, but then you also have the market segment. And the market segment is where are we choosing our comps from? What would a similar buyer be purchasing? So in the case that Frank was talking about, your market segment could be right in the neighborhood, or it could be the next county over, or even the next state over, depending upon the type of property it is, right? I mean, so you could, like I've had reports where my market segment is 3 states because it is such a unique property. What would the similar buyer look for? And so I recommend get to know different builders. So you could have one builder who is doing a master plan in this area, and then 2 counties, the next county over, or even the next town, they are building a similar one, and people want, I want a property done specifically by this one builder. So this way, if they're following the builder, that might be one of the search criteria. So we have to really hone in as what is our search criteria, and then narrow that down and clearly identify it. Because as Frank was saying, it could be a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, but his is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 5,000 square feet. Mine could be a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in a condominium with 400 units. What's the buyer looking for? We have to clearly identify it, as well as the listing agent needs to clearly identify it, as well as the buyer's broker.
and Dr. Sam, we can't just consider all the high ones, right? Or all the low ones.
Oh, man. Oh, man.
So how do you feel when you do a report and you get, you put a lot into it and you get a reconsideration of value? What do you do?
Okay, the first, what I try to do is look at the market and find property based on.
Before I even go there,
Okay.
what information? Let's look at the whole thing. How do you react? But what information is in there? What would you like to see in there if you were to reconsider something? What would you put your weight on? What would you be interested in seeing and would help you?
I try to find properties that are, of course, similar in style. Then I want to find out when were they settled, or their most recent settled sales. And then on the residential side, I'm going to compare what we call the GLA, which is the square footage of that particular property. It may be that I overlooked something, and that happens. I've had a situation where the agent brought me comps that were better than what I had. And sometimes you're doing new home construction, there are builder settled sales that haven't reached the recorded of deeds office yet. So they have sales that are valid sales that I had no access to. And so the agent said, here, you forgot this, you forgot this. Okay, thank you. So I'll take that information and use it. And many times they're right. And so I'll just use their information because it's better than what I have.
Well, and let's talk about, because somebody also said that I had said in the beginning about pending sales, about using pendings and listings. How do we use pendings and listings? How can we use pendings and listings? Michelle, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for bringing that up, because about 25 people questioned, can an appraiser use a pending sale, an active listing? Absolutely. That's market information. That's exactly what we're saying. Several people in the chat box said appraisers only use historical data. Not exactly. Yes, the sales are historical, but the research is about what's going on right now in the market. What's the supply of 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath homes of 2,500 square feet in this particular market? What's the competition? We've always been told prices always go up. We know that's not the case anymore. Prices don't always go down either. Prices fluctuate. There might be seasonal forces in your particular market. You might get a little bit more in the summer than you might get in the winter. So things kind of go up and down. So there is some fluctuation. And that's why the appraiser must do that research and see what is active out there. Is it oversupplied? Is it undersupplied? What's going on in that particular market? And don't let me forget, I got to get to that price versus value, because about 100 of you asked that. I want to jump ahead.
That's how I was going to give that one. I was going to give that to Maureen, but Maureen, finish what you're going to say.
Okay, I got to talk about that.
I just want to say very quickly and clearly, price is never a search criteria for appraisers. Why is that? Because that implies that we have a preconceived notion what the value should be. We are looking at many other search criteria: location, square footage, utility, so many elements of comparison that appear in the sales comparison approach to value on the form. P.S. If you haven't looked at a Fannie Mae form, take a look at it, so you could see what we're doing. All of this is available online, but price is never, ever, ever a search criteria. If an appraiser is doing it, they can lose their license really fast. And I am more than happy to be part of that process to put them out of the industry.
Maureen, why does the appraisal price or the appraised value so often end up exactly at the contract price?
Okay, so thank you for tossing this one in right on my lap.
Oh, I want to talk about this too.
After you're just
actually, at the end of our valuation process, we have a range. There is a value range that is established by looking at our comparable sales. Typically 3, sometimes even more. Okay, I've seen appraisals that have 12. So you'll have a range that will show up. And then we look at what is, the range could be between, say, $90,000 to $100,000. Now, if it is a balanced market, maybe that comes in at $95,000. But if it's an undersupplied market where you have huge demand, maybe it's on the higher end of the value range. If it's an undersupplied, it should be at the lower end of the value range. And Michelle, I'm going to toss that now into your lap.
Oh, just chomping at the bit. So,
girl, I'm watching.
Here's what I like to talk about. Okay, you go and you buy a brand new BMW 7 Series. I have no idea what these cost, but let's pretend it's $100,000. I could be way off. You go and that sticker price says $100,000, and you're willing to buy it and pay that. What's it worth when you drive it off the lot? Is it worth something different? Yeah. 99.9% of you are going to say yes. It's worth something most likely under that $100,000 sticker price. What have we just learned there? We've learned the difference between price and value. And price is what a buyer and a seller are willing to pay for a particular property. Agents, when you are doing your sales agreement, do you call it sales price or do you call it sales value? You call it sales price because it's price. It's a buyer, it's a seller. Appraisers estimate the value based upon a market of buyers and sellers.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Sam.
Well, there's something in USPAP called frequently asked questions. And in that frequently asked question document, it has one called frequently asked question, I think it's 28. And it basically states that according to the ethics rule, if an appraiser consistently concludes that their contract price and appraisal price are the same, then something's fishy there, and that's going to be prohibited by the ethics rule and use pact. So we have a lot of outside tentacles that are pulling on us as appraisers, and the code of ethics that we complied with our organizations plus the use pact gives us guidelines as to how do we do our work. And so even though the appraiser may have justification, when they consistently come up with the same price as the contract price, it's going to be a problem with the ethics rule and use pact.
Well, also take a look at the definition. Maureen suggested that our audience take a look at a Fannie Mae 1004. On page 4 of the Fannie Mae 1004, all you got to do is Google Fannie Mae 1004. There's a definition of market value. And what that definition of market value is based on is buyers and sellers negotiating in what they believe is their best interest. When you all are brokering a sale, isn't that what you're doing? You have buyers and sellers negotiating in what they believe is their best interest. The result of that negotiation tends to result, not always, but tends to result in a property selling at or near its market value. Now, there's other assumptions in that definition, and that is the property is exposed for sale in an open market for a reasonable length of time. Everybody's acting in their best interest, and payment is made in cash or its equivalent. We all know that financing can have an effect on the price people pay. The financing does not affect the value of the property. So I would say that if, sometimes appraisers and appraisals tend to equal the contract price, it's because you agents are doing such a fantastic job.
Yeah!
Right at market value.
So Claire, so we're hearing a lot about residential and about comparables and that, but commercially, you're using more than just the sales comparison. I mean, all of us have to consider all methods, all three approaches to value. You want to kind of inform the audience the difference between residential, commercial, and how we approach things differently, or the same but different?
Sure. Well, so I mean, I think it's the same. We have the same approach, or same idea of value, where it's the same definition of market value. But commercial appraisers tend to do longer, more detailed appraisals, and so there's the cost approach and the sales comparison approach and the income approach are the three traditional approaches to value. It depends on the property, the specifics of the property, the intended use and user, sort of which approaches end up getting used. But I would say one approach that commercial appraisers tend to use a lot more than residential appraisers is the income approach. And that's, valuing the property, looking at what the property could rent for, looking at expenses, applying a capitalization rate often, or developing a discounted cash flow. So we can get into some complexities in the commercial and that might not be addressed as in detail as you'll see on the residential forms.
Okay, and then in the same sense too, and I'll throw this to Michelle, we've had a lot of questions on VA versus conventional and FHA. So what's the difference residentially, FHA, VA, conventional?
That's absolutely a fantastic question. I'm so glad you sent that to me. So VA, folks, VA has the 3 S's: safety, soundness, sanitary. That's the main criteria for the minimum property requirements. When an appraiser is coming into your listing and it's for a VA guaranteed mortgage, they're looking for safety, soundness, and sanitary conditions related to that property. For FHA and USDA, the appraiser is coming into that property looking for minimum property requirements that are a different 3 S's. They are safety, soundness, and security issues. A conventional loan, preponderance of mortgages are conventional loans, It's a big misconception that conventional loans don't require repairs like a government loan program would. Keep in mind, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac require the appraisers to report true property condition. So just because it's a conventional loan does not necessarily mean that there is going to be no repairs. And also another misconception with these different loan types, sometimes an agent will say, well, it shouldn't really matter. They shouldn't have to do a repair or paint or do whatever because it's a 50% loan to value. It doesn't matter what the loan to value is. What the lenders have learned over the past couple of decades is that if they get this property back in foreclosure, they think, what do I have to do to this property to get it resold? So they want to get all those repairs made to that property. They don't care if it's a 50% LTV or not. So there are some nuances with VA, FHA, USDA, and conventional in terms of repair issues, but they're still market value opinions.
And how much is up to the appraiser? And Maureen, I know you want to chime in. How much on repairs is up to the appraiser, and how much is it really required? How much? Where's the difference? We get a lot of that, and I know there's a lot of concerns from agents all over the country where they see different things. Why did they require this? The other appraiser didn't. You hear that all the time. Maureen, do you have, or Michelle, Maureen?
Michelle,
Well,
I'm going to take it and then I'll piggyback on what you have to say.
Okay. So some of these things are subjective, and this is a great question, Peter. The FHA manual and the VA manual do not have every little tiny repair that could ever be conceived, because y'all have been inside houses and people have done some pretty crazy things inside those houses, haven't they? The FHA and VA manual were written for a national scale, right? So they can't conceive of every little nuance to put in there. So some of these things are subjective based upon the appraiser's inspection. The appraiser might go through and say, well, that looks like it might be a safety repair. That handrail, that staircase is really steep. I better require a handrail. Maybe another appraiser doesn't think it's too steep and they don't view it as a safety issue, for example. I picked the most common thing, the handrail. So there's a little bit of subjectivity in there. Mo, go ahead.
Right on. Thanks, Michelle. So another thing to look at is what are the building codes for the, what is required by the local government. You can have a property or an owner. Sometimes owners lie, people. I'm just going to let you in on a secret. When you're going to list your property, they may lie to you. So I've heard rumor. I'm an appraiser. I'm not a listing agent, but I've heard rumor. So if they say, I did a gut rehab on this property, ask for the permit. Because in many instances, if you are going to be repairing electric, plumbing, roof, exteriors, changing out the faucet is not a gut rehab, but changing electric, changing walls, changing the structure of the property, either as a renovation or a gut rehab, those require in many markets a building permit. So get a copy of that building permit, because you may say gut rehab on the listing sheet, and then you get all of a sudden the appraisers like they're going and doing the research to see if a building permit was pulled. No building permit was pulled, and they're like, this is a hot mess. It is not a gut rehab. It is a hot mess, and it is not going to be worth what, bottom line, lipstick on a pig. You're like, oh, let's just put a lot of this, we're going to put shiny appliances and stone countertops. That is not a gut rehab. So get your permits, find out what is required by the local land records, as well as the government agencies and the building departments.
Dr. Sam, you want to say something?
Yeah, just adding to what she said is that in Washington, D.C., we have what's called accessory units. And so many times a buyer will buy a property with the intention of using the basement as a rental, and they're going to live in the upstairs portion of the property. And many times the owner may have done that or intends to do it, and they haven't got the certificate of occupancy, COO, for that accessory unit. So when you and I as appraiser get that assignment, oh, I got a residential property. You go out there, and it's not an owner occupied property, it's an investment property. So that comes into play because they don't have the proper permits for it to be a rental unit, and it causes some issues when we do the appraisal.
Well, and you actually just brought up something that I'm going to drop a name here. Lee Brown, our own NER Lee Brown had a question asked me once, how do we deal with accessory dwelling units? And they're becoming more and more of a consideration for affordable housing. And actually there's some locations where they're creating regulations about allowing that in certain, but it starts to get confusing if you have, whether it's in the house, it's a separate structure on the property. So how do appraisers handle accessory dwelling units?
Well, I know in California and in Washington, D.C., we have a lot of that. And so you may have a detached dwelling unit, and it was probably a former slave quarters back in the days. And so now they converted it into a unit where they rent it out to people during the summer. So that's part of your GLA for the subject property. And then you have a space on the UAR form where you can include that. And so you get comparables that are accessory units, and there's some around. You use those and you quantify them on the UAR form in that separate section on additional features.
Yep. And what if, again, it goes back to what if there aren't any comps? What if there aren't any other sales out there? I guess you just have to keep looking. You have to get creative, right?
Yeah, you go back in time and then you do a time adjustment, because there are some, it's just they may be far away. You may go to a neighboring county or a neighboring city to get those, but you can find them in it. You got to explain away why you went to the next county or why you went to the next city to get the comps, but you can find some.
Right. Okay, so we also, Michelle, did you have something to say?
When we talked about VA, I just want to mention the Tidewater process. Were you going to bring?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So for all of those out there that are veterans, thank you so much for your service. The Department of Veterans Affairs has a very unique program. This is unique just for VA, and it's a veteran's benefit. It's called the Tidewater process. Mm-hmm. Nobody else does it except VA. If the appraiser is required to notify the lender if they are completing an appraisal report where it looks like the market value opinion is going to be below the sales price. So the sales price is $500,000. The appraiser is looking at the information, and the appraiser's saying, it's looking like $475 in this market. Only for VA, the appraiser is required to stop, notify the lender, and provide the opportunity for the lender to give the appraiser comparable sales or any market information. Typically, they'll go back to the real estate agent for that and provide it to the appraiser up front. It's a great process because, number one, it's a benefit for our veterans to help them get into their homes. And it gives the appraiser the opportunity to see your information up front. I frankly wish this was across the board for everyone. And I want everybody to understand, this is not about collusion or coercion on for an appraiser. This is about providing any data that the sales agent has up front, give it to the appraiser for analysis. Understand the end goal for the Tidewater initiative is simply to reduce the reconsiderations of value. I want all agents listening in Zoom land out there to eliminate the word challenge and appraisal from your vocabulary. Ask for a reconsideration. It's not about challenging, it's reconsideration is the best term to use. The best way to do that, if you're not in a VA situation, is going back to the beginning part of this seminar, meet the appraiser there and provide detailed information up front.
And it's not a low appraisal.
Right.
It's not a high.
It's a credible, and if I may, we don't deal in the world of accuracy. This was in the chat box, so I'm answering a couple from the chat box. A couple people said, well, it's not accurate. An appraisal can never be accurate. Why? Because the definition of appraisal is an opinion of value. Yeah. And an opinion can never be accurate. An opinion can only be credible based upon the research and the analysis.
Okay, well, and we're running short on time. I'm going to do one more. And this is about, should a seller get an appraisal before putting their house on the market? And I also want to put that out to Claire too, commercially, even more so probably would be a good idea. But what is your reaction to that? And we're just going to go and get an opinion from everybody. Frank, start with you.
I'll say in a market like you've got right now, I don't think I would bother. But in markets where you have more fluctuation, when it's not all in one direction, I know that I did an awful lot of listing appraisals after the last crash, and because people definitely needed to sell, but they needed to know how to place their property directly in the market. Also, I think unique properties where an agent is having a tough time preparing a CMA or something like that, in cases like that, it may be worthwhile to spend a few dollars and have the property appraised. That also, you can use it as a marketing tool. Explain to buyers, this isn't what the seller wanted. This is what the agent suggested. This is what the appraiser said the market value of the property is in today's market.
Dr. Sam?
I think it's a good idea because sometimes the listing agent having a trouble convincing an owner that their property is not worth more than any of the property in the state. And so that appraiser can kind of be a backup support system for the listing agent who's done an excellent job on the CMA. But you just have an owner who just really wants more than what their property worth because they went to Home Depot, took a class on how to install a ceiling fan, they put the ceiling fan in the basement, so now it's worth $10,000 more. So I think it's a good idea to have an appraisal done for a listing purpose to help the listing agent in some situations.
Claire, what about commercially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never a bad idea. I think when I get those phone calls though, I do like to tell people, you can't use this appraisal for financing though. That this appraisal cannot be handed over to the buyer and then they're covered for their appraisal when they're purchasing the property. So, I mean, that's just an important thing to know is, the purpose of the appraisal would be for them. And it would not be an appraisal that a bank could use if they are the client. So just so they know that there will be the need to get another appraisal if that person is, if the buyer is going to be getting financing or wants an appraisal.
Right. And we could spend a whole hour on intended use and intended users. And it would help, it would actually help users of appraisals and people who know us, but maybe don't know what we do, all the requirements and things that we have to think about when we accept an assignment. And Maureen, what about you? What do you think?
Well, there's fortunately for, Frank and Michelle, your markets are hot and on fire. I have markets in my area that are dead in the water and declining at a rate of 1% per month. And so in those instances, I would absolutely recommend that sellers do get one. And also the buyers may also want to consider getting one, because sometimes there is a buyer's agent who is not advocating for their buyer, but they're advocating for their own bank account. And which is most unfortunate because they're not going to protect their buyer and say, hey, you know what, this is declining. They're going to say, oh my God, go with the highest value number. Let's get in a bidding war or whatever we're going to do. So if the buyer hires their own independent appraiser, they are the client. They can ask and set the scope of work of what the appraiser is going to do. And so if you are interested in purchasing a property, selling a property, to get an independent opinion of value of what the property is at or what the property value is never a bad thing, and it is always a recommended thing. And this way, that puts either the buyer or the seller in charge, because when a bank appraisal, the intended user of that is the lender, and they're going to be using it for a very different purpose than the negotiation in a sale.
Thank you. Michelle?
Let me just, a couple quick things from the chat box. Personal property is never included in a market value opinion for a lender. Someone said passionately, I asked this 3 times, please answer it. We see the contract, the sales agreement, because USPAP, the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and lending laws require us to. Remember, the sales contract is market price. We're estimating market value. The reason some appraisers do not want to accept some of the difficult assignments is because often Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are risk scoring the appraisal and the appraisers. They won't admit the appraisers, but they're risk scoring it. So a lot of appraisers are saying, hands off, I'm not touching some of these difficult ones because it's going to come back with a high risk score and I can get red flagged. Not going to do it. That's a problem on the secondary market. There are 675 questions. Folks, I tried to answer as many as I possibly could.
Well, I'm going to pretty much wrap it up here. We've gone over an hour. There are questions about desktop appraisals, appraisal management companies, all of that. We certainly hope that we will be doing this again soon, but I'm going to go ahead and run through just a couple of thank yous here. And thank you, our audience, for joining us in this NAR Real Property Valuation Forum event. We hope that we're able to help you with some of your questions and help you to understand a little more about the way appraisers think and how the appraisal process works. I'd like to give a big thank you to our panelists for taking time out of their crazy busy schedules to give us their insight. They're obviously a great reflection of some of the amazing appraiser realtor members that are out there working in the field to keep our market moving, and who also bring trust and confidence to the market and all market participants. This event would never have been possible without the help of all the wonderful NAR staff, especially Seher Siddiqui, who our Real Property Valuation Forum depends on, and we would be lost without you. Thank you, of course, to President Charlie Oppler and the leadership team for being the backbone of support for everything we do. And I also wanted to thank my Vice Chair, Jonathan Hall, and our NAR liaison, Jared Booth, for their guidance and support. Thank you to all of them and all of you for helping us learn from each other and come together as one NAR family. Thank you, and see you soon.